What if Thorfinn found Jesus? When the revenge that gave meaning to life meets the truth that reveals that killing was never living. Thorfinn walked as if still obeying an order that no longer existed. His steps were firm, trained, almost automatic, but his gaze sought nothing. The world around him continued, men negotiating, children running, the wind sweeping through the fields. And yet, for him, everything seemed distant, like a sound heard through water. The blade he carried no longer weighed. What weighed was the silence that came after. After the death of the man who had defined his childhood. After the blood shed in the name of a hatred that now had nowhere to lean. He had lived to kill. Not for pleasure, but for meaning. Each blow was a promise of justice that kept him standing. Each fallen enemy seemed to bring him closer to an end he believed to be liberation. But when the end came, it did not bring rest. It brought emptiness, a void deeper than pain, because pain at least screamed. The void just remained. Thorfinn remembered the faces, not as trophies, but as echoes. Men falling, eyes wide in the last second, hands trying to hold on to the life that slipped away. He never called them innocent, never needed to. In the world he had learned to inhabit, the sword resolved matters before conscience could ask. Now, however, the questions came too late, and they came in silence. If revenge is over, why haven't I started living yet? He thought, without formulating the words. It was in this state, between what was and what he did not know to be, that he stepped away from the main path and walked to an open ground, where the wind passed freely and the sky seemed larger. There, Thorfinn stopped. Not because he was physically tired, but because the soul, for the first time, had no orders. He knelt, not in prayer, but out of old habit, lowering his center of gravity, staying ready. The ground was cold, the smell of damp grass mixed with the memory of battlefields, and without warning, he realized he was not alone. A man was there, a few steps away. He had not appeared as an enemy. He had not approached as a threat. He simply was. Simple clothing, dust on his feet, calm posture. The gaze did not seek to measure strength or assess danger. It was a gaze that remained. Thorfinn instinctively reached for his blade, then stopped. Something about that man did not trigger the learned instinct. There was no challenge. There was no fear. This disarmed him more than any attack. "Are you lost?" Thorfinn asked, his voice dry. The man replied calmly, "I know where I am." The answer sounded strange. Thorfinn frowned. "This is not a good place to stand still." "It's also not a good place to carry what you carry," the man replied without accusation. Thorfinn felt his chest tighten, not because of the words themselves, but because of their accuracy. "You don't know me." "I know those who walk wounded," he said, "and I know the weight of blood that finds no rest." Thorfinn slowly stood up. "If you came to judge me, don't waste your time." The man looked at him with serene firmness. "For God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but that the world might be saved through him." Gospel of John, chapter 3, verse 17. The words did not sound like a defense. They sounded like a definition. Thorfinn took a deep breath. "So who are you?" "I am the one who interrupts cycles." The phrase reached something deep. Cycles. He had lived within one. Hatred that generates death. Death that generates more hatred. An ancient cycle, taught by the men who called war honorable. "Cycles are not broken with words," Thorfinn replied. "They are broken with force." The man stepped forward. "Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth." Gospel of Matthew, chapter 5, verse 5. Meek. The word seemed an insult in Thorfinn's world. The meek died first. The meek were crushed. The meek did not survive the fields he had crossed. "You don't know what you're talking about," he said, his voice hardened. "I've seen what the world does to the weak." The man did not deny reality. "I have seen it too," and added, "Love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you." Gospel of Matthew, chapter 5, verse 44. Thorfinn felt a pang in his chest. "That is impossible." "For those who try alone," the man replied. "You ask me to betray the dead," Thorfinn said, with contained anger, "to say that it was all in vain." The man did not hurry. "I do not erase the past. I redeem it." The word hung in the air. Redeeming was not forgetting. It was not justifying. It was giving another end to what seemed doomed to repeat itself. Thorfinn looked at his own hands. They trembled slightly, not from fear, from memory. "I killed," he said. "I killed because it was the only thing that kept me standing." The man replied with a truth that cut without hurting. "He who takes the sword will perish by the sword." Gospel of Matthew, chapter 26, verse 52. Thorfinn felt the weight of the sentence, not as a threat, but as a diagnosis. He was already perishing inside. "So is it over for me?" The man took a step closer. "I came that they may have life, and have it abundantly." Gospel of John, chapter 10, verse 10. Life. The word felt distant, almost strange. Thorfinn didn't know how to live without an enemy, without a target, without an order to attack. "And what do I do with everything I've done?" "Confess," the man replied. and leave with me what you cannot carry. Thorfinn closed his eyes for a moment. The wind passed. For the first time, he didn't feel the urge to run, fight, or flee. He felt something new, true exhaustion, not of the body, but of the soul. If I put down the sword, he said, who am I? The man answered with a firmness full of compassion. Son. The word fell like something he had never heard for himself. Son. Not soldier, not killer, not instrument. Son. Thorfinn opened his eyes. The world had not changed, but something had been displaced within him. For the first time, revenge was not the axis. For the first time, there was a path that did not go through blood, and that scared him more than any battle. The man stood there, waiting, not demanding, not pressing, just offering the interruption of a cycle that Thorfinn had believed to be eternal. And there, in the silence that followed, Thorfinn understood that the true confrontation was not against an external enemy. It was against the idea that violence was the only possible language. Thorfinn stood still, as if the ground had become heavier beneath his feet. It was not physical weight. It was the weight of a possibility he had never allowed himself to consider. A path that did not require blood to exist. A future that did not need to be conquered by force. This disoriented him. Throughout his life, he had known exactly what to do when an enemy appeared. But there, in front of that man, there was no enemy at all. There was only truth, and truth could not be crossed with a blade. If I accept this, Thorfinn said, his voice hoarse, I will have to live with what I did. I will have to remember. The man did not avert his gaze. The wounds that are not touched continue to bleed inside. Thorfinn took a deep breath. Remembering had always been a punishment. The images came at night, when the body rested, but the mind rebelled. Nameless faces, interrupted screams, eyes that stared at him as if asking something he never knew how to answer. He had learned to survive by pushing those memories away, burying them under new battles. Now, without war, everything emerged. I don't want to carry this alone, he admitted, almost unaware that he was confessing something. The man responded with words that seemed to cross centuries to reach him. Cast all your anxiety on me, because I care for you. First letter of Peter, chapter 5, verse 7. Care. The word seemed too fragile for Thorfinn's world. No one had cared for him since childhood. He had grown up among men who called brutality training. But that care did not sound like childish protection. It sounded like support, like someone who does not withdraw from reality, but enters it. And what if I don't know how to be different? He asked. I only know how to fight. The man replied with firm patience. Learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart. Gospel of Matthew, chapter 11, verse 29. Gentle, humble. Words that had always been synonymous with weakness in his world. But there, they came accompanied by something unexpected. Authority. Not the authority that imposes itself through force, but the one that remains even when rejected. Thorfinn realized that the man was not speaking from theory. He was speaking from scars. You speak of gentleness, Thorfinn said, but I have lived among wolves. The man answered without denying the harshness of reality. I send you out as sheep among wolves. Gospel of Matthew, chapter 10, verse 16. The phrase did not promise absolute safety. It promised presence amid risk. This was different from everything Thorfinn knew. He had been trained to eliminate threats, not to navigate them with an intact heart. So what do you want from me? He asked with raw sincerity. That I simply stop? The man answered precisely. That you live. To live. Not to survive. Not to win. Not to resist. To live. The words seemed too simple for the complexity of his story. I don't know how to live without hatred, he confessed. Hatred was what kept me moving. But it was also what kept you trapped, the man replied. Thorfinn felt the truth of that. Hatred had given him direction, but never freedom. It had been a chain disguised as purpose. He clenched his fists. And those who died by my hand? Where's the justice? The man replied with a truth that did not absolve lightly, but also did not condemn without escape. Justice belongs to God. Romans, chapter 12, verse 19. It belongs. It does not rest on the shoulders of a wounded man. Thorfinn had always believed he needed to balance the world with his own sword. Now, someone was telling him that this weight had never been his. Are you saying I can stop trying to fix everything? He asked. I'm saying you can stop destroying yourself trying, the man replied. The wind blew stronger. Thorfinn felt his body relax a little, as if an old tension began to yield. There was no magic solution. There was no cheap forgiveness. There was a real demanding invitation that required more courage than any battle, the courage not to hurt. If I follow this path, he said, I will be hated by many. The man nodded. In the world you will have tribulation. John, chapter 16, verse 33. He completed, but take heart, I have overcome the world. The victory he spoke of did not sound like territorial conquest. It sounded like faithfulness until the end. Thorfinn realized that the courage proposed there was no less than what he had always known. It was greater, because it did not rely on the destruction of others, but on the transformation of oneself. And what if I fail? He asked once more. The man replied with something that did not allow for remaining in error, but guaranteed presence in the process. 70 times 7. Gospel of Matthew, chapter 18, verse 22. Thorfinn felt something tighten in his chest. It was not fear. It was hope. And hope was something dangerous for someone who had already lost so much. But still, it was there. He fell to his knees, not out of obligation, not out of ritual, but because the weight he carried had finally found a place where it could be laid down. "I don't want to kill anymore," he said, with a choked voice. "But I don't know if I can be good." The man approached and spoke with firm tenderness. "No one is good except one, who is God." Gospel of Mark, chapter 10, verse 18. The phrase liberated and confronted at the same time. Thorfinn did not need to be good by himself. He needed to stay close to the source of good. He took a deep breath. For the first time, the blade at his waist did not feel like an extension of his body. It felt like an ancient object belonging to a life that was beginning to close. The man took a step back, not as one who withdraws, but as one who trusts. "Follow me." Nothing more. And at that moment, Thorfinn understood that the true battlefield was not before him, but within, and that there, finally, he was not alone. Thorfinn remained kneeling for a few moments after those words echoed in the air. "Follow me." It was not a military order. It did not come with a map, strategy, or promise of victory. It was a simple invitation, and, precisely for that reason, terrifying. To follow meant walking without hatred as a compass. It meant accepting days when the past would scream louder than hope. It meant learning to live in a world where the sword would no longer be the automatic answer. He stood up slowly. The body was still that of a warrior, marked, trained, hardened. But something had changed in the axis that supported him. For the first time, he did not feel the urgency to prove anything to anyone. Not to the dead, not to the living, not to himself. "And when the memories come back?" he asked, in a low voice. "When I hear the screams again?" The man answered with the same calm firmness that had run through the entire conversation. "The truth will set you free." John 8:32. Liberation was not erasure. Thorfinn understood that. Liberation was preventing the past from continuing to govern the present. It was allowing memory to exist without dictating the next blow, without demanding more blood as payment. "I lived thinking I needed to kill to honor my father," he said. "Now I see that I only perpetuated what killed him." The man nodded, not as one who accuses, but as one who recognizes pain. "Every kingdom divided against itself is laid waste." Matthew 12:25. Thorfinn felt the truth of that phrase cut through his entire history. Burned villages, destroyed families, children turned into soldiers. A world that had taught generations to call vengeance an inheritance. He had been a product of that, but it didn't have to be the end. "So, is there another legacy?" he asked. "There is," the man replied. "He who sows peace reaps life." Thorfinn looked around. The field seemed the same, but his eyes were no longer the same. He had always believed that strength was the ability to destroy. Now, he was beginning to realize that perhaps the greatest strength was to interrupt the cycle, to interrupt the impulse, to interrupt the repetition. "If I follow you," he said with raw honesty, "I will not be remembered as a hero." The man replied without hesitation. "Whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for my sake will find it." Gospel of Matthew, chapter 16, verse 25. Thorfinn took a deep breath. He had already lost his life many times, in battles, on sleepless nights, on days driven only by hatred. Perhaps, for the first time, he was about to find it. He touched the hilt of the sword. He did not let it go. There was no theatrical gesture. But something inside him decided that this weapon would no longer define who he was. It would no longer be his identity, perhaps not even his future. "I don't know if I can be gentle," he confessed. The man replied, "I will be with you every day." Gospel of Matthew, chapter 28, verse 20. Every day. Not just in moments of victory, not just when the decision was easy, every day. Thorfinn felt the weight of that promise. It was not light in a superficial sense. It was firm, sustainable. They walked a few steps together, not as master and servant, but as someone who guides and someone who learns to walk without running. The silence between them was not empty. It was full of meaning. Each step seemed to rewrite something ancient within him. After a while, the man stopped. Not because the path ended, but because the choice needed to be daily. "The peace I give is not like the world gives." Gospel of John, chapter 14, verse 27. Thorfinn understood. The peace that the world offered came after victory over the enemy. The peace that was being offered there came from the renunciation of being governed by him. The man walked away, not as one who abandons, but as one who trusts that the seed has been sown. Thorfinn was alone again. But it was not the same loneliness. It was space. Space to learn. Space to make mistakes without returning to hatred as a response. Space to build something that did not arise from death. He looked at the horizon. There was no enemy waiting. There was work. Silent work. Slow work. harder than any battle, living differently. And this is where this story ceases to be just about Thorfinn. Because perhaps you too have lived for years driven by something that seemed to give meaning. Anger, revenge, pride, survival. Perhaps that kept you standing, but never at peace. Perhaps now, when that engine begins to fail, you feel the same emptiness he felt. The question then is not, who is my enemy, but who have I become while fighting? The gospel does not promise to erase what has been done. It promises to interrupt the cycle. It does not deny the pain. It goes through it. Jesus does not call warriors just to lay down their swords, but to discover that they were never created to live only by war. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Gospel of Matthew, chapter 5, verse 9. To pacify is not weakness. It is courage sustained by love. It is choosing to live when everything in you has learned to kill. If this story spoke to you, do not ignore it. Subscribe to the channel for more narratives that confront the violence of the human heart with the grace that transforms. Share with someone who still lives in war within. And write in the comments, I choose to interrupt the cycle. Because when the revenge that gave meaning to life meets the truth that reveals that killing has never been living, hatred loses the throne, the sword loses its voice, and life, finally, begins.